Hi everyone, welcome to our unit on grammar and legal writing. I know when you hear the word grammar, most of us do not get super excited. We're not really ready to jump in and talk about boring things like grammar or legal writing styles, but I promise it is well worth our time to take a step back right here at the beginning of the semester and spend a little bit of time talking about really important grammar rules and really important pieces of legal writing style. So this probably won't be the first time you've heard this information about grammar. This should be a refresher and a reminder. And I don't mean to give you a pop quiz on grammar or to test what you already know, but to really just give us a space here to kind of step back and think about our writing. Something I mentioned in this unit that I will carry through the entire semester is how important it is that our writing is clear, that it does not have grammatical or spelling errors in it, and that it is concise and unambiguous. Often when we write, we think we're being really clear. Like we write something and we think everybody will understand what I'm writing. But we know that's not always the case. So what I'm going to press upon us now in week 2 of the semester and carry it all the way through the rest of the semester is to slow down on our writing. And it doesn't mean to write slower. What I really mean is there's a lot of steps to the process of writing. Writing is not something we sit down and in an hour or two we're done with the entire writing and editing process, and then our writing is done and it's clear forevermore and for everybody. Our writing is actually a process and requires a lot of planning and a lot of organization. And we're going to do a lot more on planning and organization when we learn more about using IRAC and legal analysis and the interoffice memo. But one of the pieces of the process of our writing is editing. And that means taking the time to reread our own sentences, sentence by sentence, to make sure that commas are there when they're supposed to be there, quotation marks and punctuation are in the right place, and that the words that we're using are clear, so that somebody that's not familiar with our writing can actually understand what it is we're writing and what it is we're saying. So to do that, I've broken this down into 2 parts. The first part is this PowerPoint on grammar, and the second one is on legal writing style. So when it comes to grammar, I like to focus on what I call the most common grammar issues that I have seen in many, I would say almost 2 decades of teaching legal writing and legal analysis. These are the errors that I see the most. That doesn't mean there's not others. These are just the ones that I see the most. And again, I'm not going to sit here for the next couple of hours and just give you a straight grammar lecture, but I do want to go over some of the key mistakes that individuals make and show you some websites and some guidance on how to avoid making those mistakes. And I'll say this once now, and I know you'll hear me say this again. Your writing is a reflection of you and your work. And I am sure in your legal careers, there are times you're going to put hours into doing legal research and analysis, and you never want silly grammar mistakes to be a reason that your supervising attorney or someone else in your office or the court or the client doesn't, you don't want them to question the work that you've done because there's grammatical errors in them, in the work. So take those few extra minutes and double check yourself. Okay, so we're going to go over quotation marks, commas, and then a little bit about apostrophes, and very quickly on run-on and fragment sentences, which actually relates to commas, and then indentation of paragraphs. So I'm going to toggle on my computer back and forth between this PowerPoint and also some websites and stuff I'm going to show you. So you'll just bear with me while I just move away from the PowerPoint and go on to other websites or other pages that I want you to look at. But the first one we're going to talk about is using quotation marks. Because in legal writing, we often quote other material. Who do we quote? We often quote cases. We might be quoting a full sentence from a case or a phrase, but we also might be quoting testimony. We might be quoting someone's deposition transcript or our client's own notes or taking material from like a medical record or something like that. So there is time that we are using somebody else's words to express what it is that we want to say. And when we take somebody else's words or phrases or sentences, we have to attribute it properly with quotation marks. And so one of the errors that I've been seeing more commonly is not understanding punctuation when it comes to quotations. And there's not going to be, a one-size-fits-all answer for this, but the most important thing is to ask yourself, what is the material that you are actually looking at quoting? And make sure that the quotes appear around that material. We also use something in the law that are quotations of quotations, because sometimes we could be reading a case like the case of Smith v. Jones, and Smith v. Jones quotes an earlier case, maybe, Sugarman versus Middlesex. And so we have to learn how to properly do quotes within quotes. So let me show you the first of our exercises on that. And I'm just going to exit out of the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go onto this website. And it'll be the first time I show you and direct you to something called Grammarly. On your Blackboard page, I have actually given you links to a number of really good grammar resources. One of those is Grammarly. So Grammarly will go through for you and show you all the proper quotation methods if you have questions about how to use quotations. But I actually wanted to scroll down and talk about when commas and punctuation go within the quotation. This is something, I'm not really sure where this trend began, but I have now started to see a lot of individuals put punctuation outside the quotation mark. So you would make a sentence like this, I'm not exactly sure that's what happened, and put the period outside the quotation. Most of the time, that is not correct. So you can see here that in the United States, the rule of thumb is that commas and periods go inside the quotation marks, because that is how we structure our sentences here. So for example, there was a storm last night, comma, then quotation, Paul said, and then period. So notice that the comma goes inside the quotation mark. Peter, however, didn't believe him, period. I'm not sure that's exactly what happened, period, and then the quotation mark. This is standard for using quotation marks in English writing. Now, there are some times we put quotation marks outside we put the punctuation outside the quotation marks. But, and here's an example here, and that is because this is the quote of what the person said. Paul saw an argument coming, so he muttered only, but I saw it. And then we would put the semicolon outside the quotation marks. Another good way to look at this is using a question mark. If the question applies to the quoted material, then they go within the quotation marks. However, notice and compare these two sentences. If the quotation marks apply to the whole sentence, that is, that the quotation mark here applies to the entirety of the earlier sentence, then we put the quotation mark outside. So what have I already gone through? See the differences between using periods and commas, that those generally go inside the quotation marks. But when it comes to using the quotation marks or exclamation points, although we don't use those as frequently, we have to look at the context of the whole sentence. So for example, Sandy asked them, why do you guys always fight? The reason that the quotation goes at the end and the question mark stays at the beginning is because this question mark belongs to Sandy's question. Sandy asked them, why do you guys always fight? Question. However, compare the next sentence. Did the dog bark every time he heard Sandy say, I'm bringing dinner? Now, Sandy's quote isn't a question, right? I'm bringing dinner. The is not a quote, is not a question. So that's why we'd put the question mark at the end of the sentence. Did the dog bark every time he heard Sandy say, I'm bringing dinner? The quote is, I'm bringing dinner. And so the question mark now goes on the outside. Obviously, I've said this before, but feel free to pause this video and you can reopen Grammarly on your own website and look at some of these examples, or listen to my voice again if that's helpful, but otherwise I'm going to keep going. One of my favorite features about quotations is what I just mentioned, the quotes within quotes. We absolutely use this frequently within the law. So I wanted you to see that what you end up doing is a double quote. Okay? But it looks a little weird when you have double opening quote and double opening quote. I know this is kind of a bad example, But when we have quotes within quotes, we use the double quotation marks for the big quote, and then the quote within the quote is a single quotation mark. Let me see if I can show you an example. I'm just going to toggle over to a Google Doc that I have with some examples. Okay, I'm going to scroll down. Sorry, I was in the wrong place. Here we go. I'm going to look at this example right here. I was on the way to the park when I heard Bob scream, "I was robbed," the witness said. So here's the full quote of the witness. I was on my way to the park when I heard Bob scream, "I was robbed." That is the witness's testimony. So that part would use these double quotes here. See the double quote and the double quote? But the witness is saying a quote that somebody else said, which is what Bob said. And Bob said, "I was robbed." So here's the quote within the quote. I was robbed. So we use the single quotation marks and the single quotation marks here. I'm going to link these examples, and they're already linked on your Blackboard page, so you'll see them there. I'm just not going to take the time to read all of them to you on the PowerPoint. But I wanted you to see the use of the double quote here. I was on my way to the park when I heard Bob scream, "I was robbed." And then there's another example down here where you can see the use of the double quote. And what I usually recommend doing is putting a space in between them so that you can see where one begins and the other one ends. On this page too is the link to the same Grammarly website that I had you linked to before, where I could show you about quotation marks. Okay, so that covers our first topic on quotation marks. I'm now going to go back to the PowerPoint, and I see that we've covered about the grammar issues of quotation marks. The next one that I want to talk about is actually one of my favorite topics, and that is commas. I think that there is a huge myth out there that because sentences are long, they need more commas. And that sentences that are short don't need commas. And that we do this thing where we write a really long sentence and we think to ourselves, it must need a comma somewhere. I'm going to dispel you of that myth and have us use commas only where they are necessary. So longer sentences don't always need commas, and commas actually are really important to the meaning of a sentence. And then I'm going to let you in on a little hint, and I'm going to pause this and I'm going to go on to video number 2 because I'm almost at the end of video number 1. This is one of my most important hints. If you are unsure about where to put a comma, if you look at a sentence and you're like, I think it needs a comma, maybe it needs 2 commas, but I'm not really sure, rewrite the sentence. No one needs to know that you decided to split a longer sentence into 2 shorter sentences so that you resolve for yourself whether it needs a comma or not. In our next PowerPoint, in the next video, I'm going to show you some really easy examples where you might say to yourself, I don't know if this deserves a comma or not. And the answer is, don't worry about it, rewrite it into 2 shorter sentences. You're never wrong to do that because then you can be assured of yourself that you've answered the grammar part correctly. So I look forward to seeing you on PowerPoint number 2, where we're going to talk about commas.